Trump may have dominated the conversation from day 3 at the World Economic Forum's 2026 annual meetings, but the Nigerian delegation was not missing in action, with the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale, mounting the stage for a panel discussion alongside the President of the World Bank Group, Ajay Banga, and other business leaders. The topic, a coming jobs challenge in emerging markets. Question. Here's just a snippet of that exchange.
Electricity is even more basic. So let's talk Africa, where Wale is from. Africa has 600 million people without electricity. I'm not talking brownouts. I'm talking no electricity. So when you fly over Africa at night, you think it's not populated. That is not true. People are living the way their great-grandfathers lived. That cannot be right in the 21st century. It is a travesty to think that electricity is not a basic human right. So if you want to build a digital public infrastructure, try doing that without electricity. How do you plan to charge your phone? A connection to the sun with your finger? And this is not going to work. So a very basic commitment is electrification. Sure. So we've talked about getting to 300 million people by 2030 with electrification. And I'm not talking about one solar cell with one fan and one light in the house. That's not productive. I'm talking about the ability to have a computer, the ability as a chemist to have a fridge for your medicines, the ability to open a hair salon, the ability to do those kinds of things. Right? So that's kind of one thing there in infrastructure. Bridges, roads, airports, everyone understands. Digital and power tends to get ignored a little. In Nigeria, we're doing distributed solar energy. That's how we're going to reach large numbers of people in his country for power. That, when you're putting up that distributed solar energy plant, if you plant a cell phone tower at the same time, if I reach 25 million people in Nigeria with power, I now reach 25 million people with the internet. Now Nandan's idea becomes real. You see what I mean?
What we must not miss out is, yes, we are looking for jobs, we're looking for employment, but a lot of it is informal, so we do have to go down to that informal sector. And I would like to mention here that we do count a lot on the fact that we have to provide power, we have to provide electricity. And the Mission 300 World Bank AFDB initiative to provide 300 million Africans with power by 2030 is a key component of building up that momentum to provide the resources, to provide power that will increase productivity and create jobs. So yes, we do have the formal sector, but there's a big informal sector that just needs to be empowered. And by the way, I said 400 billion Nigerians, 400 million Nigerians, 2.5 billion Africans. Otherwise, it would be impossible.
All right, quite a lot to break down there. And joining us to do just that, we have Ayo Ekpo, the CEO of Excredite Consulting Limited. We also have Faiz Muhammed, a development finance expert, as well as Oyinkan Teriba, an economic analyst. It's great to have you all in this morning. And I'll begin with you, Oyinkan. And I don't know, for some, that may have been a little awkward to watch. Nigeria and Africa, broadly speaking, we're seeking, investors, we're dialoguing with potential prospects. How do you see us position ourselves in these deal rooms such that we are getting favorable terms and not positioning ourselves as some sort of dumping ground for other countries?
I think the real challenge that we have is the perception of what these deal rooms are about versus what the reality is, right? So if we're thinking about Nigeria's development trajectory, of course, we do need sort of investment in the higher end, sort of in our financial sector, investors who are coming in and sort of helping us take advantage of this technology dividend that the minister spoke about. But at the same time, development in Nigerian growth, especially jobs-oriented growth, is going to come from the mucky sectors like agriculture that people don't really see as sexy. And so the challenge is positioning yourself in a deal room as a country that is serious about development and a country that has the capacity to kind of absorb this kind of investment and move it in the economy in a way that's productive, but also in not abandoning the sectors that are seen as less sexy. And I think one of the kind of challenges that came up there is you're looking at how we're educating our population, but then the president of the World Bank is taking us right down to the fact that we just don't have the numbers of people who have access to the internet or even access to power. And so that kind of duality of Nigeria's position as like effectively two separate economies, the economy of Lagos, where you've got like bustling employment in the formal sector, versus an economy of Niger State or an economy of Sokoto, where you have people who are largely kind of getting by using agricultural labor, right? And so being able to balance those two and being able to ensure that we're not just kind of, as we've seen in recent years in terms of our capital importation, seeing money get absorbed into our money markets, money get absorbed into our financial sector, as opposed to money kind of going directly to foreign direct investment in the most productive sectors, jobs-wise.
Interesting. So a lot of strategy that goes into that and targeted efforts. I'm coming now to you, Faiz, and obviously we're talking about electricity now, which is considered the most basic infrastructure you can provide for people to empower them. We've seen a lot of reforms in that sector over the past couple of years. And would you say the reforms are playing a major role in, Nigeria's pitch to global investors?
Yes, I think Oyinkan put the issue quite succinctly. Power sector reform isn't just an energy issue. It's about Nigeria's credibility. Manufacturers, industrial players, and even tech companies need reliable electricity to operate competitively. And for years, businesses have relied on diesel, which is expensive, it's inefficient, it's bad for the environment, and that raises costs and limits job creation. So when Nigeria talks about attracting investment, power reform is central to that story. Investors are watching closely to see whether the reforms are actually producing results, not just policies on paper, but real improvements in supply, in transmission, in regulation. Are the tariffs transparent? Are contracts being honored? Is the regulator truly independent? These are the signals investors look for. And the opportunity behind that is huge. If Nigeria can deliver more reliable power, it immediately strengthens our case as a manufacturing and industrial hub for Africa. But credibility depends on consistency. And I think it's been very clear that inconsistent reforms have actually been what have defined the power sector over the past couple of years. And reform only works if it survives political pressure and delivers measurable outcomes.
And of course, there are concerns as we have entered a pre-election year, whether they'll be able to consolidate some of these reforms or circle back. We will be watching to see what happens. I'm coming now to Ayo Ekpo. You are a practitioner in that sector, have been for decades, and up for discussion is that particular sector. I can only imagine your thoughts watching that discourse. How and why are we still here in terms of electricity? And of course, Mission 300 came up there. So the Mission 300 by 2030, is it practical? At what cost to Africa? And are we on track?
To the program. I think that the Mission 300 program is one that, if anything, had the chance of, not from rhetoric to doing what needs to be done, it would be that. The problem is well understood. The plan is in place, and the idea of putting action to that plan is one that we're beginning to see some serious work around. How did we get here? Well, I think that Faiz has pretty much summarized it. A lot of rhetoric, a lot of talk that has gone in over the years. I think the last 25 years this year, if my memory serves me. But the inconsistency in the application of political will and in the delivery of technical capacity to getting the various precepts of reform done has been what has landed us where we are today. Just simply not doing the things that we know we ought to do and doing them consistently and with capacity and competence. Start, stop is not going to deliver anything. And as you might say, Makani did say a few days ago, nostalgia does not equate with strategy. So also does rhetoric not also equate with execution. How did we get here? I think we all know now. We know what to do, but we haven't done them in the right way. I think I'll just leave it at that.
And speaking of Mark Carney's speech earlier, in the week, it garnered quite the attention. There was a particular quote there: if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. So from where you're standing, and Africa's positioning, are we placing the orders or are we being ordered?
Put it nicely, I'd say it's a work in progress, right? Many people would think at the moment that we are not yet at the table, but I don't think that we are yet on the menu. We've talked a lot about Nigeria's size. We've talked a lot about our population. We've talked a lot about our capacity. We've talked a lot about our potential, but we've never really executed right. The interesting thing is about what Carlos said is that it's not new. In fact, I would even say that Nigeria actually started the idea of a concept of medium powers. If you remember, 40 years ago, this year, almost to the day, actually, General Mohammed went to the OAU and spoke about Africa coming of age. 10 years later, Professor Bolaji Akiyemi actually floated the idea of a concept of medium powers. Those that are not necessarily big enough, but certainly have to be part of the conversation. And Kane, 30-something years later, has reprised that idea and given it some flesh. What he said is something that we need to, bear in mind. It's not about rhetoric. It's not about talking. It's actually about constructing and being part of a program that says you have done certain things that gives you the right to be at the table. Nigeria, to be honest with you, hasn't quite done those things. But I also think that we are going beyond rhetoric now. If you look at the market in the country today, you are beginning to see a major change in the way the market itself is structured and designed. You are beginning to see a recognition that there has to be an interest held by players across the entire value chain. Look at what Tunelumelu has done. Look at what the likes of Sahara and Mainstream are doing, going beyond just being in the generation or in the gas producing space, and also being players downstream and making sure that end-to-end the value chain works. That's the beginning of actually getting execution done right. But when you do that also against the background of a plan like the M300 plan, which looks also at the other element of the market that really don't tend to address in the right way, which is the off-grid market, and trying to bring more people into the frame of engagement as a whole in the market, then you begin to see also that there's work that needs to be done, as recognized as needing to be done, but also being done. So I think the Kane formula makes a lot of sense. I don't think that we are yet regressed to the point where we are on the table, but I also don't think that we have fully earned our place at the table. That is work that needs to be done, and I think that the world, if I may say so, is expectant of Nigeria, maybe slightly disappointed that we haven't done this a lot earlier. But I think that the world is beginning to see that we're getting our act together. And what we now need to see as Nigerians is the consistent application of political will in getting these things done. We know what needs to be done. We have the people to do them. We know how to do them. We just need to stay focused and stay with the plan.
So we are earning our place at the table. I'm coming to you now, Oyinkan, and obviously some of the rhetoric coming out and the conversations coming out, the rules-based international order is being tested from what was said. Multilateral institutions on which middle powers have relied on, that architecture of collective problem solving, it's under threat. So what's your assessment of Africa's response to this novel, emerging, should I say, new order?
I mean, the challenge is that the rules-based international order isn't kind of dying or being tested. It's already dead. And it's been quite clear for some time now, at least a couple of years, that the kind of old order that Mark Carney talks about, where you have the appearance of a rules-based international order, but that being kind of consistently undermined by the hypocrisy of great powers without being kind of challenged or called out by people who are just trying to kind of get along, is falling apart, because the knock-on impact of this, if you look at protest movements in developed countries, if you look at kind of the inability to kind of deliver on cost of living across the developed world, right, has been a collapse of political legitimacy. Now, in his speech, he talks about the first kind of settlement, which is the kind of NATO, Europe and North America settlement, where people kind of wanted to be under the security umbrella of the United States, and so were willing to put up with the United States' imperialism in the kind of early 21st century. But there's another kind of picture to that, which is for the developing world, those who kind of fell under the kind of allyship or effectively satellite states status of the West. In the early 2000s, you kind of had the Paris Club negotiations, you had widespread debt forgiveness. And so for many countries, kind of that singular road towards market liberalization and kind of like sympathy on the international stage, or the kind of Millennium Development Goals, meant that countries felt if they kind of took that road, that would be kind of paid off in the form of effectively development assistance bankrolled by the United States. But most countries in the global north are cutting their aid budgets. The World Bank and the IMF are chronically underfunded. And so effectively, we have to start thinking about what is the world that we're inhabiting at the moment, right? The ambition and the scale of the M300 project is amazing, but the question is, does it have the resources to follow through? You know, we've had a series, it's not just at the Nigerian level, but also at the international level. You had Power Africa from the United States, in collaboration with a number of other multilaterals, right? But many of these have failed to deliver. And I think now what's becoming clearer in this Davos is that Nigeria's been a bit too navel-gazing, and Africa in general, right? These conversations are happening. In Makani's entire speech, he didn't mention Africa once, right? And part of that is not just because of our position development-wise, it's also because we're not at the forefront of doing the thinking of, or the vision work of what the next stage or the next world order is going to look like and what our place is going to be in it. And I think we need to start talking more seriously about the fact that Africa is going to be the hub. You know, the minister talked about how 25% of the world's population, working population in 2050 is going to be African. But I think also Africa is one of the kind of last kind of hotspots for effectively virgin land to be able to build a development vision which is tech integrated, right? Which is also kind of more efficient in the way that it uses extractive resources. But unfortunately, because our conversation is still stuck in, you know, the world of 2015 with the Sustainable Development Goals, we're not really kind of moving beyond that. We're not really able to kind of leverage what we have to punch above our weight. So what I really want to see more of is responding to the world as it is, even on the power question. You know, Pakistani farmers and rural dwellers are importing 17 gigawatts of power in 2025 in terms of cheap Chinese solar panels, right? If we're still having this conversation about access to power, and we're still having that conversation as a largely, if we kind of give a cursory glance to off-grid power, but effectively a largely grid-based conversation, then we're already stuck in a world of the past. So I do think that there's a lot more work to be done just at the analysis level so that Nigeria kind of gets its bearings and Africa gets its bearings about what is happening in this really chaotic world, so the world doesn't happen around us while we effectively keep coming to the table like Oliver Twist.
Indeed, for more responding to the world as it is. Very well put, Oyinkan. I'm coming to you, Faiz, and in reference to what Ayo had said, he did say that Africa, Nigeria, is earning its place at the table. Do you agree? And how do you think that can be further consolidated with all that's happening geopolitically? Faiz?
I think one of the clearest messages coming out of global investor conversations is that credibility is earned and not announced. And I think over the past year, many governments, including Nigeria, have delivered strong reform narratives, often at global forums like Davos. But investors now ask a more practical question, as in what has genuinely changed on the ground. They look at things like foreign exchange, the ability to repatriate profits, regulatory consistency, how existing investors are treated when challenges arise. And I think confidence will improve when reforms are applied evenly and survive political pressure. It weakens when policies are reversed and exceptions are made or rules are discretionary. In Nigeria's case, I think investors are tracking whether recent macroeconomic and sectoral reforms are becoming institutionalized. Are the systems improving, or are the outcomes still dependent on ad hoc decisions by individual regulators or even politicians? I think speed also matters. How long it takes to approve projects, resolve disputes, clear backlogs. And for long-term investors, time is risk, yes? So what we're seeing globally is that capital flows towards countries like Nigeria that demonstrate follow-through. And these are places where reforms are embedded in institutions rather than driven by individual actors. And so I think that's the critical point. While Nigeria may be making the right moves, that can be lost very quickly. The countries where investment is a win are in countries that show steady, measurable progress, quietly, consistently, credibly. And I think it still remains to be seen whether the momentum Nigeria currently has is going to continue onto the future in the same manner.
Consistency sounds like the key there. And finally, I'll tie things together with you, Ayo. Roughly this time last week, I was speaking with someone on the show, and he's not from Nigeria, but he basically called Nigeria out. Africa lacks a leader, a unifier, right? A nation that rises up and rallies all 54 countries to assert themselves on the global stage. Nigeria was called out. So I'd like you to assess the impact of the absence of a regional hegemon and how that affects our seats at the table.
The question answers itself. If we were where we were 50 years ago, really, when Faiz Muhammed made that speech at the UN, if we were where we were 10 years later, when Bolaji Akinwumi talked about the Council of Medium Powers, you wouldn't ask the question. We would have gone well beyond where we were at that time and positioned Nigeria and have one or two other countries in Africa, because we grow and others grow along with us. So effectively, it's not just about being called out, but also about the fact that we are holding Africa back by not attaining what we should have attained, by not going on from where we were in 1987, when Professor Bolaji Akinwumi was talking about the concept of medium powers, which he expected. It was then set up by something called the Lagos Forum, which made Nigeria the center of this new thinking, and therefore its execution at the continental level. Somehow we faltered. And so, like I said, the question answers itself. The question now, which we should be asking, is the kind of question that Faiz and Oyinkan have been talking about. What are we doing to construct a place on which we can stand as a country and recognize for what it is we are, which is a great power, at least as far as Africa is concerned. We're not there yet by any stretch of the imagination, but I think we've moved quite a distance in recent times from rhetoric to beginning to get things together. Now, like you said, it's consistency. Talking about the power sector, which I think is a key enabler for being able to stand up and be counted, we stagnated for something like 10 to 12 years post-privatization. We should have taken action and ended what was clearly the incapacity of those that took over distribution companies in 2013 and stopped it and effectively restarted. We haven't done that, but now financial institutions of the country, major players in the upstream side, are making that happen almost by force. So you've got a Hares Holdings, a Transcorp that is doing what it is doing. We've got a Mainstream that is doing what it is doing, trying to integrate the value chain and bring some credibility and sense into the way the distribution sector is being run. So it's still early days. I think it's the beginning of a new way of doing things in the electricity sector. And so you can't, at this point in time, have a record of consistency that shows that we actually know what we're doing and we're set on doing it. But I think that in the coming year, I think 2026 elections and the politicking around the country notwithstanding, this is the time to actually show that we can stay away from the noise of politics and actually focus on the reforms that we need to do to make us show, to make our country show itself as one that needs to be taken seriously. A country that cannot power itself simply will not be at that table that McCartney was talking about. And so for me, maybe I'm being biased there, but for me, we need to focus on showing that we actually have a sector that can go beyond M300 and what it does to help us, and actually stand on our own 2 feet and put in place policies, put in place the financing, put in place the frameworks that show that we can actually aggregate capital for ourselves as a country and apply it in the right way in the sector. So in many ways, there's been a, shall I say, power sector reform 2.0 that has started, I think, in the last year or so since the Electricity Act was passed and since it started being implemented in 2024. It's still early days, but I am hopeful and I'm optimistic. I think better than I've been in the years before 2023 that we know what we're doing and we are set on getting it right. A lot of it will not come from the government. The government has done what it needs to do, put in place law, put in place policy, show a program of activity. A lot of it now needs to be done by the private sector, buying into that narrative that the government has put out and showing that they actually know what to do in and for the sector.
And hopefully we see just that, but we will be monitoring and speaking about it here on the show. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen and lady. Ayo Ekpo, CEO, Expedite Consulting Limited, Faiz Muhammed, Development Finance Expert, and Oyinkan Teriba, Economic Analyst. A pleasure having you all in.